Did you know that cinema is a language? The truth is, most moviegoers don't really think about it that much. But then again, they shouldn't have to. The whole point of cinema is to walk into a theater and lose yourself over to the movie up on screen and go on a journey into a life that is not your own. So why would they worry about the distracting artifice behind it? I mean, an audience in theory understands that there's a lot of people putting in time and work, but because of that invisible magic of cinema, they also assume you can just sort of put a camera in front of some subjects or some fancy scenery or whatever, and it'll all magically work out. It doesn't. Heck, if you've ever tried making your own stuff in high school, you learn this really quickly. Hollywood efforts don't just come to life because of production value or lavish sets. It's because most filmmakers understand the language of cinematography. They understand that certain shots, angles, and colors don't just show you what you're seeing, they communicate how you should feel about it too. And often, those shots have meaning in and of themselves. And if you want to know, you should be able to learn it too. And it often makes me upset how little critics talk about the basics of cinematography. Maybe they don't even know themselves. But I just know how little we give the glossary of simple terms for the audience so that they can actually understand what they're seeing. Because there really is a proverbial ABCs of cinematic language. So let's talk about it! To that, here's the glossary of moves in cinematography and how they affect the audience. There are 6 larger groupings. Let's start with the first. Section 1. Shot types. Now, one actually judges what defines a traditional shot by the size of the subject relative to the frame. For instance, a wide shot means the viewer can see a lot of the space where the scene is set, whether it be a landscape or even just a room. It is most often used to establish the scope of the place the subjects are located in, the geography between the subjects, and the emotional context of the space at large. Then, on the other end of the spectrum, there is the close-up, which is one of the most powerful tools a filmmaker has at their disposal. It brings us near an actor to see every bit of emotion on their face, their pain, their sorrow, their yearning, or their desire. And yes, those are the only 4 emotions. But there's a delicate art to the close-up. Letting us close to an actor's face makes for such a uniquely intimate moment. If you use them too much over the course of a movie, you can actually lose the potency of this powerful effect. Use it too little, you will take away the audience's crucial need to connect and emote with a moment. Now, a medium shot is, of course, the halfway point between a wide and a close-up. It generally shows an actor from the waist up. The intent of this shot is to get some of the benefits of each. You're close enough to get some intimacy with their facial expression, but you can also see the actor's relationship with the space. That is, their interaction with objects in the scene, or, most importantly of all, other people. Which brings us to the two-shot. This is really just the general term for any time 2 actors are on screen at once. There are a host of variations within this that mostly have to do with where a subject is facing in relationship to the camera. For instance, in an American 2-shot, the 2 subjects will face directly toward each other and we'll see them both in profile. Wes Anderson has a lot of shots like this, often to highlight the distance between the 2 people in question. Or there's another variation called a dirty 2-shot, in which we're really emphasizing one subject in a medium or close-up, but we can also see bits of the other character in frame, usually just over their shoulder. This gives us more context for understanding the space between the characters. Often it is used to gently remind us how much of the other person is present or has a bearing on the scene. Zack Snyder reminds you about other things. Lastly, an insert shot is any close-up of an object or gesture that gives us a piece of information. Sometimes it's an object the characters are fixating on. Sometimes it's what a character is doing, like making coffee. Or sometimes it's about someone trying to hide something. Imagine 2 people talking over dinner, but then we see a quick shot of one of them pulling a gun from out of their pocket below the table. This would make us feel dread and a sense of dramatic irony, all from an insert shot. Now, as I go through all these examples, note that I'm not just trying to describe the shots in and of themselves. I'm trying to show you the way that these shots have a direct effect on us as a viewer and the information that we will take away from them. Section 2. camera angles. Now let's talk about the angle of a shot, which implies where the camera is in relationship to the subject, not just the size of the subject. A low angle shot is when the camera is lower and looking up at the subject. This is most commonly used in horror movies when you want to make a terrifying monster feel all the more imposing. Meanwhile, a high angle shot is when a camera is above the subject looking down on it, which can make the subject feel meek and scared. Keep in mind these don't need to be used exclusively for horror. They can be used subtly to emphasize power dynamics and relationships between your characters, especially within the space at hand. For example, I think about how often they're used in films like Remains of the Day, where characters are constantly looking up and down stairways to emphasize their status and class differences. A Dutch angle is a shot where the frame itself is not parallel to the x-axis of the scene. In other words, the camera is leaning in a direction to the left or right. An excellent example of this might be seen in 1995's 12 Monkeys. This is a technique that makes the audience feel off-kilter or like something is amiss. But again, it's all about purpose. It works better in a paranoid movie like this one, but I genuinely don't understand the near wall-to-wall use of it in a film like Battlefield Earth. I think the error comes from a misconception. The director may have wanted the movie to feel alien, but using these shots is just another case of layering an entire aesthetic over a film and not making choices for the emotion of the moment. Just because the world itself is bizarre doesn't mean you want to pummel the audience with the same paranoid feeling like you're trying to do in something like 12 Monkeys. It's all about using the language in a way where you understand how it makes the audience feel. Lastly, a POV shot is when the camera is looking from the point of view of the character themselves. There's a kind of voyeuristic quality to the shot, as it literally puts the audience in the character's shoes. There's a lot of examples of this in Silence of the Lambs, where we're witnessing terrifying things from Clarice's exact perspective. But remember, when you do this, you have to signify it in the edit by cutting from other establishing shots. But of course, a camera doesn't just sit still. It moves. Section 3. Camera movements. So a static shot is when a camera doesn't move at all. Hey, stillness is a move. And it usually happens when the camera is locked onto a tripod. I feel like a lot of young filmmakers are afraid to use too many static shots because it feels plain to them. But this is the base language of all filmmaking. And if you're properly editing between them and bringing shots closer and closer to your subjects and you build this tension, then it can not only feel kinetic, you have this perfect control over what information and emotion you want to emphasize and when, which is only the most important thing in all of mise-en-scène. Next, a camera tilt is when the camera stays at a fixed point on a tripod and tilts up or down. Now, there's something interesting about this motion because it draws attention to the idea that the audience is in a fixed position and looking up and down, effectively simulating a character's POV. Now, sometimes this can actually take the viewer out of the story if there's no established context, but you'll also see it done a lot in establishing shots to show we're high up in a certain building. Like you'll see it in like Soderbergh, like he'll start on the like ground level and like looks up and like some living area. It's like yeah. All right. That's what I mean by that. Now the term tilt, I'm gonna burp. I burped.
Congratulations.
I did it. Now the term tilt is also sometimes interchanged with another shot called a pan or panning shot. But that's actually when the camera is turned on the horizontal plane, allowing us to follow a subject in their space. The film Roma used this technique beautifully to show Cleo walking around the house she worked in, highlighting the way the family often ignored her as she went on with her chores. Now, truthfully, people mix up these two words and they'll often say pan up or tilt right, and then ad clients usually get it super wrong. But the most important part is you simply know the direction the camera is moving. But then there's what happens when the camera isn't locked down to a tripod at all. A handheld shot is when the camera comes off the tripod and an operator uses it mounted on their shoulder, usually. The intent of this kind of shot is to give the scene a documentary-like affectation and make the scene feel more grounded in reality. But this is actually one of the first big misconceptions of cinema. Not only can too much handheld make the viewer feel sick, what handheld really does to an audience, emotionally speaking, is make the audience feel out of control and uneasy and like things are in danger. And when a film chooses that moment wisely, it can be used to great effect. But when making a film where everything's handheld, you frequently lose the inherent subtle communication that comes with a lot of other kinds of controlled shots. Remember, just because it's easier production-wise doesn't make it inherently effective. Mark my words, there is never a one-size-fits-all stylistic approach when it comes to shot selection, especially when there are so many other graceful alternatives. Now, you may have heard the term tracking shot before, but that phrase gets us into some complications. Because people often take a tracking shot to mean the shot tracks the subject. But not only is that a bit of a misnomer, that might not actually be where the term comes from. Back in the day, you had to lay down actual track for equipment, hence the term tracking shot. But the problem is, once we started using more advanced equipment, a lot of people kept calling them tracking shots, and we stuck to the terminology, and I'm talking like this now. People think I'm being pedantic when I talk about this, but I mention it because there is still miscommunication on set because of this usage issue. That's why, on set, you'll see most people identify the shot based on the kind of equipment being used. To that, a dolly shot is when a camera is put on a dolly. That is, a cart with wheels that are on the aforementioned tracks. It not only sets up a very careful and precise path, it allows for the perfect repetition throughout takes. For the audience, it puts their own eye in motion, but only on the horizontal plane. This motion actually gives the viewer a sense of control, believe it or not. We feel less like we are absorbing and more investigating a given location, peering into the world and exploring it. And because you are generally at ground level, you feel like a mere human traveling through the scene. A Steadicam shot uses a Steadicam. It functions a lot like a dolly shot, but with even more fluidity, because now you can use the Z-axis to glide up and down as well. No longer just a human being, the camera now has a true God's eye. It makes the audience feel all-seeing and all-powerful, capable of floating around any environment and taking in ornate detail. But like the close-up, there should be warnings in wielding this kind of power. Because of the Steadicam's time-saving ease, you see so many big movies shooting so much Steadicam these days, to the point that it kind of loses its power and purpose. It just makes the whole film feel effortless and easy, but with certain shots, that's what you actually want. Think of the famous shot in Goodfellas where Lorraine Bracco's character is being guided through the restaurant, which appears to be this kind of wonderland, and she's taken in the back way and given special treatment. Scorsese's not just doing it because it looks cool. He's doing it because it's this perfect way to emphasize her emotional experience of how dazzling and smooth and carefree his life can be. But the rest of the movie? It relies on so many other kinds of cinematic language that get into the various emotions of the moment. Lastly, a crane shot. And it makes use of a specialty crane that introduces even more range to the Z-axis. It allows you to get shots that would be completely impossible for any human being to achieve. It's a God's eye view to the max, and great for larger-than-life spectacle. Now, there's a whole bunch of other super expensive equipment that you can use for cars, but we'll cover that some other time. Section 4, lenses and focus. So, there's a reason most cinematographers don't really give a rat's ass about what camera you use to shoot your movie. Not only are most debates about modern camera resolution pointless, this demo from Steve Yedlin, linked below, is incredible, but also all the important information a viewer needs is communicated through the choices a director and DP make together. And the visuals of the film are much more dependent on the lens selection than on the resolution of the camera. For example, your lens selection greatly affects your depth of field, that is, how much of the subjects within frame are actually in focus. A lens with deep focus means you can capture a lot of detail close to the camera as well as detail that's far away. This allows a director to show lots of information in both the foreground and deep in the background. It's great when you want to show your subject within landscapes or what you want to communicate through the detailed context of the surrounding area. Think of a scene in something like 1981's Blowout, where you see John Travolta working busily with all this sound equipment and things scattered all over the room. The viewer is meant to notice the mess within his surroundings. A lens with shallow focus will make anything that is not the same distance with the main subject blurred. This has the benefit of making the audience concentrate on what really matters on the scene, leaving everything in the background or immediate foreground hazy and unimportant. Imagine if a character was receiving some heartbreaking news. You want the camera to emphasize all the pain on their face and fully register that and nothing else. Now, a rack focus shot is when you actually change your focus from one distance to another. There's a simple, famous example of this in the opening of The Lion King. First, we see the worker ants crawling along the edge of a tree. Then, the shot racks focus to legions of zebras galloping behind them on the ground. This is also great when you want to emphasize people's reactions at different times within a shot, or shift the audience's focuses ever so slightly so that they notice something. Now, within lens selection, there's also the question of the angle of the lens, which is sort of a misnomer, or at least it's confusing because that term also applies to things we mentioned in cinematography above. What do you want from me? I didn't make up these terms. I'm trying. But what we're really talking about is the focal length within the lens itself, and those are usually measured by millimeter ranges that go from about 8 to 170 millimeters. Aside from how these measurements capture the aforementioned depth of field, they also affect the distortion of the image. For example, a wide-angle lens will take in a lot of information, but it'll also make everything that's too close to the camera seem huge and bulbous, and everything far away seem small and tiny. It's like looking through a peephole, essentially curving the image in a rather dramatic, surreal way. On the other hand, there's a long telephoto lens, which will not only be able to zoom in on objects far away, but it will actually flatten the image instead of making it bulbous. It'll make it so that all the objects seem like they're at the same depth. There's this famous shot in The Graduate where Dustin Hoffman is running down a road at great speed, but because the image is flattened, it seems like he's almost running in place, which adds to the feeling of futility. What this also allows for is a camera zoom, where it makes it seem like the camera is rushing in quick or zooming out, but all the movement is actually done within the camera itself. A zoom can be done in a subtle way, but often it can be jarring, a way of hyper-emphasizing a subject or throwing off the audience. Next, we ran out of letters. Oh no, what do we do? Well, this is a fun thing that we can correspond to cinematography. Learning is fun. On set, you actually mark the number of camera setups on the slate with an A for the first setup and a B for the second, and so on. But when you've done more than 26 camera setups in a scene, well, you start the alphabet over with AA and then AB and so on. So we're keeping with a theme. Next, we have a shot called the vertigo effect, which is when the camera actively zooms in or out while the camera itself actually moves in the opposite direction, like the scene in Goodfellas, and it gives the viewer this surreal, paranoid, unnerving effect. But keep in mind, all of these are just the extremes of what you can do with camera lenses. There's so many options out there that have an endless amount of flexibility. The famous photographer Henri Cartier-Bresson said he loved shooting with the 50mm lens because it was the closest way to simulating the human eye. Now keep in mind that's only true at certain distances because the eye has this amazing ability to adjust focus, yada yada yada. But finding the right lens and shot will take this constant tinkering, especially in terms of how you're trying to capture the faces of your actors. One lens might make them look gaunt, while another gives them a fullness of life you're looking for. The effect of this choice is so powerful. Section 5. Eyelines. Let's hear it for eyelines, yay! This simply refers to the direction the characters are looking, and that may seem small, but it's actually one of the most important things about cinematography. Not only does the character's eyes direct the viewer's gaze from one person to another, but they tell us so much about what the characters are concentrating on and why. So when we discuss eyelines, the best way to talk about them is in terms of degrees. Imagine the character is looking right at the camera. Yep. This is 0 degrees. And if they're looking completely away from you, that's 180 degrees. And if they're turned in perfect profile to the left or right, that's 90 degrees. Got it? Cool. Because this will establish how we talk about the effects of different shots. Now, most of the time, a character's eye line will be within 45 degrees of the audience's gaze, meaning they will be facing the camera and looking toward you, but not directly at you. This centers the character's eyeline directly at the other subject they are talking to or looking at. It gives us just enough visibility to see what their eyes are doing and communicate their emotions beautifully. Now, having them look outside 45 degrees will actually draw the viewer's eye away to something else. Maybe it's a new insert shot. Maybe it's something coming into the scene. We don't know. But it's something. When a character looks past 90 degrees and away from the camera, they instantly become a mystery to us. It almost feels like they're trying to hide something. But while this communicates that action itself, it's important to remember that you are still denying the audience the emotional connection with what the subject is feeling. For instance, there's this beautiful monologue that Richard Jenkins gives in the movie Eat, Pray, Love, where he's talking about something he's so sad and ashamed of. So they make the choice to have him turn away from the camera for a lot of it. And yeah, it's like, I get it. But in trying to communicate that overtly, they actually deny us the opportunity to connect with the deep emotion the character is feeling. And we cannot emote alongside them, which is only the entire damn point of what you were doing. Lastly, when a character looks 0 degrees and directly into camera, please understand that this is creepy. And that's because it effectively breaks the fourth wall and the social contract with the audience that makes us feel invisible. So usually when someone's looking directly into a camera, the camera should represent the POV perspective of the main character so that we can understand it's happening in turn. This way, there will be a purpose to the unnerving effect of having someone on screen look directly at us. Silence of the Lambs was so good at using this because it wanted to creep us out. It didn't want to bring us closer. We'll get to misuses in a second. Section 6. Colors and lighting. Of course, color tones and hues and lighting gradients prompt feelings within the viewer. We have so many beautiful associations with color and mood and the meaning of both. And there are endless permutations to this. So again, I'm going to try and focus on the extreme ends and what they communicate to us. Specifically shots that use dominant hues. Now, a cool blue sheen will make things feel distant, cold, or unemotional. Meanwhile, blue's complementary color yellow will make things feel warm, sunlit, even swelteringly hot. Notice how both these colors were famously used for emotional effects in the movie Traffic. Then a green hue evokes nature and can make things feel lush, organic, and renewed. But when applied to urban and man-made environments, it actually makes us feel sickly and unwell. A red hue is, of course, the color of passion and sumptuousness. Darken that same color in a brown hue will make things feel antiquated and old, which is largely informed by the old discoloration on photographs. Now, a purple hue is often a tricky color because it's either regality, or it's spring blooms, or it's romance, but it's often ruled by the context of different cultures, so that one can go many different directions. Next, a black hue evokes, of course, darkness and mystery, fear of the unknown, all of which that we cannot see. And a white hue signifies the blinding intensity of being overwhelmed or perhaps enveloped in a blank, detailless space. Now, all of the previous examples were, of course, overt, but a lot of times the approach will be more subtle and organic, meaning you'll be mixing certain colors into overall color palettes. For instance, a warm summer palette that is red and yellow and white combines the emotions associated with those colors into a bigger form of happiness, and you'll see it in a lot of romantic comedies. A winter palette that is white and blue and purple delivers a cooling effect, communicating isolation and detachment. Rather than relying on one color, palettes deliver emotion in a naturalistic way that doesn't feel overwhelming. Now, we could make a whole video on the endless permutations of lighting that could change a shot, but they're really just two general modes to mention here, and they have to do with the key of the lighting. For instance, a shot with high key lighting, meaning everything is really brightly lit and detailed so there's no harsh contrast, will make actors look good. And it has the added benefit of making the audience feel comfortable and safe. Meanwhile, a lot of dramas use low key lighting, which is a bit of a contradiction because sometimes the magnitude of the key light itself can be very intense, but that's neither here nor there. What we're talking about is creating high contrast and lots of shadows, often within interesting shades of gray and gradients. It is essentially more designed and signifies to us a serious, dangerous, tragic, and sad world. Like literally every film noir ever. So there we have it. The ABCs of cinematography. I know it seems like a lot of information, and I know I've barely scratched the surface. We could keep talking about the function of fill lights and kickers and color tones, but that gets us into the territory of construction. That is the way we take all these ABCs and combine them into cinematic language. We call this combination mise en scène, and it's the end result of the way everything about a movie comes together. And it's critical because no element of cinema is ever completely singular. Take the single most powerful tool in a filmmaker's arsenal. That's right, shot reverse shot. Think about it. The simplest of cuts between two subjects is remarkable. It magically and quickly transports the viewer back and forth, and they're able to take in two people's conversations in real time. It's so dang important to virtually every scene in everything, ever. But the basic execution of shot reverse shot can be messed up easily too. For instance, I can be looking at two perfectly beautiful shots, but when I put those two shots together and the eye lines don't match, that's technically bad cinematography, even though the issue is only revealed through the edit of the two shots. This is why constructing a scene needs forethought. unity of vision, an understanding of how everything ultimately goes hand in hand and hand in hand. But it's not just about preventing the bad, but emphasizing stronger emotions. And sometimes it's counterintuitive. Remember when I said that utilizing close-ups too much could be wearing on an audience? Well, that's certainly true, but what if someone used the wearing quality for artistic effect? In 1968, John Cassavetes made a film called Faces, and it's largely a series of close-ups that brought you close to these brutish, desperate, and agonizing people who also had these bits of vulnerability. The point was to feel too close and worn down and put off by these people. So it's all about using the effect of a given shot to get what you actually want. For instance, remember when I said Silence of the Lambs use a character looking directly into the camera to make it unnerving? Well, I don't know if you've ever seen Peep Show, but it's a comedy where the characters often stare directly into the camera when confronting one another. But it uses the unnerving tension for laughs. The camera work just plays up their anger in comic fashion. It feels so over the top.
You're a fuckhead! That's what you are! A fucking shithead!
But that's the genius of it. And likewise, sometimes people get that function wrong. For instance, there's a certain director who uses this tactic a lot, but he doesn't realize he's messing it up. Tom Hooper often defends his camera staring by saying that he's using this to make it more intimate and emotional. But like Peep Show, it's not letting you in. It's just pushing you away. But what do I know? He's an Academy Award-winning director. He can't make misguided decisions. Time always wins, folks. Look, inventive camera work isn't achieved by ignoring the rules. It's using that knowledge to create new and purposeful effects. Like, think of the way that David Lynch can take a shot of something that's bright and sunny and happy, but he'll use this eerie sound pitch underneath it to make it feel terrifying. It's all on purpose. He's trying to set up the main thrusts of the film and how these worlds of darkness hide under shiny, happy exteriors. It may feel original, but really he just understands the different effect of these two tactics. He's using the established language correctly. And just like someone trying to speak a new language in real life, you really have to be able to use the words correctly in the first place. I mean, I can't go up to a French person and just say things that sound French to communicate.
Je m'appelle! Mais poupou!
Not only would that be ineffective, it would be downright insulting. The same is true of cinematography, just in a much more subtle and complex way that many people don't often notice until it's too late. What this really tells us is that the ABCs of cinematography are like any language. Once you understand the cues that viscerally affect the audience, you can use them to push the language, engage the viewer, stretch the limits of combinations, juxtapose story and meaning and themes and symbols in order to guide our experience, in order to be understood, in the name of shaping something better. And this is just the beginning, because the language of cinema is about so much more than camera moves. It's sound, it's music, it's VFX, it's rhythms, it's edits, it's everything. There's still so much to talk about. Good thing we're gonna make more videos. Yay. Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching. It means the world, and for your patience and everything else. We're already hard at work on the next one and we're very excited about it. But right now I just want to thank all the supporters on Patreon who have been amazing and is the reason all of this is possible. So just a few shout outs to Chris Branch, Cable Nitwit, who else we got in here? We got Husbeef. Liking that one. Thank you to Neil, not Neil. Thank you to Mohammed. Thank you to Rek Law. That's a cool name. Stephen Pettigrew. Thank you to Shady Crafts. Yeah. Thank you to Jose Garcia. Thank you to Drake Lazarus. Thank you to David Lemieux. Thank you to Kemper Heron. Thank you to Clementine Webb. Thank you to Karen Walker. Thank you, everybody. It really means so much. And again, I'm really excited about the next video coming up. You're going to like it.